So guys, we are here, Museum of Medicine, mostly in French, but I'm gonna try to explain it to you in English.
The Flaubert and History of Medicine Museum is a museum in Rouen, in France, which occupies the birthplace of the French novelist Gustave Flaubert in the former Hotel Dieu. Listed as a historic monument on March 11, 1932. Flaubert was born here on December 12, 1821. This would seem to be the extent of Flaubert's association to the museum that now resides in the historic space, since other than a few artifacts from the author's life, the rest of the collection consists of strange medical relics and equipment. But before I go to that in details, let's talk about him. Flaubert is a novelist regarded as the prime mover of the realist school of French literature, and best known for his masterpiece Madame Bovary, a realistic portrayal of bourgeois life. Flaubert's father, Achille Cleophas Flaubert, was the chief surgeon and clinical professor at the Hotel Dieu Hospital in Rouen. His mother, a doctor's daughter, belonged to a family of distinguished magistrates, typical of the great provincial bourgeois. Flaubert began his literary career at school, his first published work appearing in a little review, Le Colibri, in 1837. His childhood friend, the young philosopher Alfred Le Poitevin, whose pessimistic outlook had a strong influence on Flaubert. On November 1841, Flaubert was enrolled as a student at the Faculty of Law in Paris. In the city, he was an indifferent student and found the city distasteful. He made a few acquaintances, including Victor Hugo. Toward the end of 1840, he traveled in the Pyrenees and Corsica. In 1846, at the age of 22, after an attack of epilepsy, he left Paris and abandoned the study of law. Henceforth, he could devote all his time to literature. Unfortunately, in the same year of January, his father died, and his beloved sister Caroline also died the following March after giving birth to a daughter. Flaubert then retired with his mother and his infant niece to his estate in Coise, near Rouen. He was to spend nearly all the rest of his life there. On a visit to Paris in July 1846, at the sculptor James Pradier's studio, Flaubert met the poet Louise Colette. She became his mistress, but their relationship did not run smoothly. His self-protecting independence and her jealousy made separation inevitable, and they parted in 1855. In 1847, Flaubert went on a walking tour along the Loire and the coast of Brittany with his lifelong friend Maxime Ducamp. The pages written by Flaubert in their journal at this tour, Over Fields and Shores, were published after his death under the title Par les champs et par la grève. Some of the works of Flaubert's maturity dealt with subjects on which he had tried to write earlier. At the age of 16, for an instant, he completed the manuscript of Mémoires d'un Fou, or Memoirs of a Madman, which recounted his devastating passion for Elisa Schlesinger, 11 years his senior and the wife of the music publisher whom he had met in 1836. Elisa also provided the model for the character Marie Arnoux in the novel L'Éducation sentimentale. This work was to be rewritten in two distinct intermediate versions in the manuscript, Novembre in 1842 and a preliminary draft entitled L'Éducation sentimentale in 1843-46. Stage by stage, it was expanded into the vast panorama of France under the July monarchy. The composition of La Tentation de Saint Antoine, or The Temptation of Saint Anthony, provides another example of the pursuit of perfection that made Flaubert go back constantly to work on subjects without ever being satisfied with the results. In 1839, he was writing Smar, the first product of his bold ambition to give French literature its Faust. He resumed the task in 1846-49, in 1856 and 1870, and finally the published book of The Temptation of Saint Anthony in 1874. The four versions show how the author's ideas changed in the course of time. From November 1849 to 1851, Flaubert was traveling in Egypt, Palestine, Syria, Turkey, Greece, and Italy with Maxime du Camp. Before leaving, however, he wanted to finish La Tentacion and to submit it to his friend the poet Louis Bollet and du Camp for their sincere opinion. For 3 days in September 1849, he read his manuscript to them, and they then condemned it mercilessly, suggesting instead that he focus on day-to-day life rather than fantastic subjects. In 1850, after returning from Egypt, Flaubert began to work on Madame Bovary. There are several inspirations to the novel, such as Eugene Delannoy, a country doctor in Normandy who died of grief after being deceived and ruined by his wife, Delphine. Another was the manuscript Memoire de moi, Ludovica, discovered by Gabriel Leroux in the Library of Rouen in 1946. This is an account of the adventures and misfortunes of Louise Pradier, the wife of the sculptor James Pradier. As dictated by herself and apart from the suicide, it bears a strong resemblance to the story of Emma Bovary. Flaubert, out of kindness as well as out of professional curiosity, had continued to see Louise Pradier when the bourgeois were criticizing her as a fallen woman, and she must have given him her strange document. The novel, which took 5 years to write, was serialized in the Revue de Paris in 1856. The government brought an action against the publisher and the author on the charge of immorality, which was heard during the following year, but both were acquitted. Finally, when Madame Bovary appeared in book form, it met with a warm reception. He immediately began to work on Salamambo, a novel about ancient Carthage, in which he set in his dark story of Hamilcar's daughter Salammbô, an entirely fictitious character, against the authentic historical background of the revolt of the mercenaries against Carthage in 240 to 237 BC. His transformation of the dry record of Polybius into richly poetic prose is comparable to Shakespeare's treatment of Plutarch's narrative in the lyrical descriptions of Antony and Cleopatra. A play La Chateau de Caire, The Castle of Hearts, written in 1863, was not printed until 1880. Then came 1870, and those years were a difficult time for Flaubert. Prussian soldiers occupied his house during the War of 1870. The merits of the sentimental education, which appeared a few months before the outbreak of the war, were not appreciated, and Flaubert was much disappointed. His two plays, Le Sexe Faible, or The Feeble Sex, Candidat, or The Candidate, likewise had no success, though the latter was staged for 4 performances in March 1874. Then, his mother died in 1872. After that, in 1875, his niece Caroline's husband, Ernest Comonville, a timber importer, found himself heavily in debt. Flaubert sacrificed his own fortune to save him from bankruptcy. Flaubert sought consolation in his work and the friendship of George Sand, Ivan Turgenev, and the younger novelists Émile Zola, Alphonse Daudet, and especially Guy de Maupassant, who regarded himself as Flaubert's disciple. Flaubert temporarily abandoned work on a long novel, Bouvard and Pécuchet, or Bouvard and Pécuchet, in order to write Triconte, or Three Tales, containing 3 short stories, Un Cœur Simple, or A Simple Heart, a tale about the drab and simple life of a faithful servant, La Legende de Saint Julien Hospitalier, or The Legend of Saint Julian the Hospitalier, and Herodias. This book, through the diversity of the story's themes, show Flaubert's talent in all its aspects, and has been held to be his masterpiece. Unfortunately, Flaubert lived with venereal diseases most of his life. His health eventually declined, and he died of a cerebral hemorrhage in 1880 at the age of 58. He left on his table an unfinished page and notes for the second volume of his novel Bouvard and Pécuchet. There had been so much controversy about this bitter conclusion, as the form that it was to take was left undetermined in the notes Flaubert left, though the materials were gathered and have been published. He was buried in the family vault in the cemetery of Rouen. Flaubert was a prolific letter writer, and his letters have been collected in several publications. A monument to him by Henri Chaput was unveiled at the Museum of Rouen. According to scholars, Flaubert's aim in art was to create beauty, and this consideration often overrode moral and social issues in this depiction of truth. He worked slowly and carefully, and as he worked, his idea of his art became gradually more exact. He often repeated that there were no such thing as a synonym, and that the writer had to track down the unique right word to convey his thought precisely. He worked in sullen solitude, sometimes occupying a week in the composition of one page, never satisfied with what he had composed. Flaubert explains that the correct prose did not flow out of him, and that his style was achieved through work and revision. This painstaking style of writing is also evident when one compares his work output over a lifetime to that of his other peers such as Balzac or Zola. Flaubert published much less prolifically than was the norm of his time, and never got near the pace of a novel a year, as his peers often achieved during their peaks of activity. Walter Pater famously called Flaubert the martyr of style. Now you know the life of Gustave Flaubert, let's continue on walking around the museum. The History of Medicine Museum seems to have very little to do with the writer, but everything to do with grotesque medical history. The strangest of the 18th and 19th century medicine is in full display here. There are 11 permanent collection rooms, cabinet of curiosities, apothecary, dental practice, and 6-seater sick bed. An important collection of ceramics, literature, and old books can also be found here. A former sick ward adjoins the apartment. The surgeon's room where Flaubert was born in 1821. On the ground floor, one can see a mannequin used for childbirth demonstrations in the 18th century, designed by Angelique de Coudray. There are also military surgical kits, wrought iron gates from 1775, and the mummified heads of agitators hanged in Rouen in 1789. Outside, a medicinal herb garden adjoins the house, and since 1982, the garden has housed the monument of Gustave Flaubert. A hair relief by Henri Michel Antoine Chaput. Inaugurated in 1890, it was originally stood on the facade of the Rouen Museum of Fine Arts. As a site for lovers of literature, the museum may be a bit of a disappointment, but for the lovers of the grotesque, Flaubert's name has kept this treasure trove alive. And the best thing is, it's free!
So guys, I hope you enjoy our tour of the Museum of Medicine. Till next time, bye!
So guys, if you like our videos, please subscribe to our channel and feel free to comment.
Hit the bell, hit the bell, hit the bell, hit the bell, come on guys, hit the bell!
For notifications.
And don't forget to share!
And like!